Hey, folks. Can anybody hear me? Oh, there we go. Hey, my name is Dr. Pete. Most of you guys know me already. Here to welcome you all to the first Leader Speak series of the year. And it's my pleasure to introduce Kamyar Enshayan. He's the director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Education at the University of Northern Iowa. So he's an engineer with graduate degrees in solar energy and agriculture. In 1997, he launched the UNI Local Food Program, and he often consults with communities on strengthening their local food economy. He served on the board of Food Routes Network, the Iowa Association for Energy Efficiency, and the National Farm to School Network. He served as a member of the Technical Review Committee for USDA North Central Region for Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education. He teaches environmental studies up at UNI, and he works to turn science into action in energy conservation, renewable energy, and sustainable agriculture. So please help me welcoming Kamyar Enshayan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is so wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for taking the time to be here. I decided to not show any pictures and everything, and mostly just pose a few stories and a few questions so that we can then start discussing them. Okay, so I won't talk a whole lot. So basically I want to share a couple of ideas. One is, how many of you have seen that TV series called Breaking Bad? It was a significant number. So I want to kind of, there's a connection between that story and Iowa, of course. As I was watching it, I was just thinking about Iowa the whole time, even though it was taking place in New Mexico. I don't know, for those of you who haven't watched it, Breaking Bad was about the tragedy of meth enterprise. And of course, Iowa is one of the epicenters of that. So the other theme is the idea of, an immigrant kind of thinking about citizenship. I've been thinking and struggling with that for a long time. What does it mean to be citizen of a place? What does it mean to be an immigrant? And so I like to kind of explore those ideas with you. Okay. Usually in the spring semester when I teach my environmental studies class, the theme relates to energy and climate. And so we start reading a book that's called Lost Mountain. And Lost Mountain is written by Eric Ries, who's a journalist, and he takes a monthly hike up one of the mountains in eastern Kentucky where they're doing mountaintop removal, and basically by the end of the year the mountain is gone. So so this is really a beautiful book. It's a mix of kind of what he sees, and he weaves the kind of the local history of that area into this, reveals what's going on. What is it like to live in eastern Kentucky when there's a lot of coal mining going on? So he explains how acid and heavy metals are dumped into local streams, how mercury from the mining operation pollutes drinking water and wells of people of eastern Kentucky, that blasting the mountains shakes the foundations and cracks the foundations of people, the homes of people who live there, flash floods destroying the communities. And so my students are reading all of this, and they just can't believe it. It's like, is this like in the U.S.? Is this happening like now? And unfortunately, yeah, it's happening right now. Old growth forests, the only remaining ones in eastern United States are just basically cut up, dumped on the edge. Streams buried by these, what they call overburden, when they just push all the things that aren't coal down the mountain. And then, of course, another feature of Kentucky is that the coal industry has a major grip on the legislature, county sheriffs, county supervisors, local just everybody, basically. It's a company town. And again, you read it, and it's all by evidence. You kind of see, wow, I can't believe. So the local people seem not to have any really say in what happens to them. Most of the coal is exported, of course. And of course, in Cedar Falls, where I live, the Cedar Falls Utilities is very kind of proud that they have the very cheapest electricity rate in the whole state. That the cheaper, the better, right? Electricity has to be cheap. And so the author, at some point, after several chapters, you kind of read all this, and I'm totally, it's a very, very short summary what I just said. But he asks a very important question. He says, why should Dayton and Detroit, or China for that matter, get the coal but be held accountable for none of the environmental consequences of that extraction? Why is that? Why should a region be sacrificed so that others can have this cheap coal, right? And if everyone else is doing well, why is Eastern Kentucky so poor? So this is a very important question. What does this mean when we extract wealth from a region, none of this wealth comes back to that region? So keep that question kind of on the side. Now I want to come back to kind of Breaking Bad in Iowa. So the dominant economy of our state is agriculture, obviously, right? We live in a very agricultural state. Nobody could argue that. Now, before we look at Iowa agriculture, I'd like you to imagine, if you can, what you hear of, say, banana plantations in Colombia or in a central South American country. What are the features of their agriculture? Well, there is one or two commodities like coffee or banana, which you can't eat all the time, right? There are large plantations. Farmers really don't have any, they're not getting good prices necessarily. There is violence, there is drugs. The wealth produced has not improved the lives of these regions, okay? So so similar to that, it's like that in Iowa, okay, where we have two crops. Farmers do not control the prices of those crops. There are a set of multinational corporations that totally control everything about price, about inputs that farmers need to raise their crops, and then the very companies that sell farmers the inputs and fertilizer and the seeds are the very companies that buy the corn and beans from them and dictate the price. So what do we have going on in Iowa? What's this Breaking Bad? And I once wrote a column for the Des Moines Register where I argued that right after the Breaking Bad had ended, where the TV series ended, saying, yeah, well, the TV series ended, but the real thing goes on in Iowa every day. And I meant not just the meth. We know that's going on too. In Black Hawk County, there were 70 meth lab busts in 1 year. It's just like this is just like it's all around us. I can tell you lots and lots and lots of stories. I served on the city council in Cedar Falls for 8 years and kind of have gotten to know the law enforcement, all those people, and just amazing what goes on. And it's right here, like right in our communities. So here's what we have that's really amazing. Fertilizer and pesticides and animal waste in our rivers and streams. It's just like these are not just my opinion. These are like hard evidence. We have hard evidence. We have severe soil erosion, extreme pesticide use. Pesticide meaning weed killers, insecticides, mostly weed killers in Iowa. Poor land use leading to flash floods. We're just seeing it every year, right? And rural residents suffering from health problems from these very large animal factories and loss of biological diversity. and loss of agency. This is really amazing. Loss of democracy. Have you guys followed the lawsuit between the city of Des Moines suing the upstream landowners, and the small Storm Lake newspaper won a Pulitzer Prize for telling that story? And really, what they really revealed was that the county board of supervisors in their county relinquished their responsibilities, gave it to the Farm Bureau and several other, corn growers to defend the county. It's really amazing. That's why they won the Pulitzer Prize, for revealing that the people of their county didn't have agency. And that we in our state, people who live in these regions, didn't have, our elected officials weren't looking after us. That's really amazing. So that's really, with all of these things, soil erosion, water pollution, people not being healthy from the drift from the hog lots, people in Des Moines drinking fertilizer. If a foreign power had done this to us, we would send in the Marines. If somebody had done all of this to our region, think about it. But it's amazing. But we're kind of tolerating it, It's just like, and we said we feed the world, right? It's like the opposite of acknowledging our situation. Rural communities are declining, meth epidemic, abuse of labor, human trafficking in these egg farms, etc. It's really amazing. In my county, 1 out of 2 children who attend Blackhawk County schools qualify for free and reduced lunch. Really amazing. Most of what Iowans eat isn't grown even in Iowa. That's another amazing thing, which means all of our food dollars is leaving our state, right? Because we're not growing it here, it all leaves. So something is fundamentally wrong when we live in a very agricultural region and hardly anything that we eat comes from this region. So I pose that question to you. Think about it. Like, we're not living in a space station where everything is shuttled in. We live in Iowa. We have great soils. We have people who know how to grow food. And yet somehow the economy of my dinner plate is disconnected from the livelihood of farmers around here. There's something wrong. And the only people who can fix that is us. Nobody's going to come and fix it for us. We have to grapple with that, and we have to figure out, what are we going to do? So I turned the same question that Eric Rees asked in Kentucky here. So why should grain merchants and ethanol plants get cheap corn but not be held accountable for the damage? Right? Why should people in Des Moines drink fertilizer because corn merchants want to have cheap corn? Right? Why should China, who wants cheap pork, not be held accountable for the full costs of raising pork? Right? If Iowa has such a high quality of life, then how do we reconcile rural decline and meth epidemic? How do we live with this? So, and what does it mean when a dozen egg are 99 cents at Quick Star? What does that mean? Who wasn't paid? What cost have we not paid so that's just 99 cents? All right, so I'm asking this question. So set that aside too. So now I want to kind of talk about more about what it means to live in a region. What's our home state, this place, right? And if we want to care for it, if we want to tackle some of these problems, we really got to be focused on around where we live, our counties, our state, right? And yet, the cultural messages that we give ourselves and our children is that they don't focus on our region. So the message is that that of rootlessness and uprootedness rather than rootedness. Okay. So, for example, I just made a list of some of the common kind of signals we send to our youth. That you got to be on the move, otherwise you're not advancing. Right. Cool things happen elsewhere. You're in the middle of nowhere, right? We're in the middle of nowhere. And that you couldn't possibly live a happy, satisfying life unless you move to where the action is, which is someplace else, right? In his book called Grassroots, The Universe of Home, Minnesota writer Paul Gruco writes, among my science courses, I took 2 full years of biology, but never learned that the beautiful meadow at the bottom of my family's pasture was a remnant prairie. We did not spend, so far as I can remember, a single hour on prairie, the landscape in which we were immersed, in 2 years of biological study. And then he goes on, he said, I took history courses for years, but never learned that one of the founders of my town, and for decades its leading banker, the man who platted the town and organized its school system, its library, its park, and its fire department, was also the author of the first comprehensive book on Minnesota's prairie botany. I can only imagine now what it might have meant to me, a studious boy with a love of nature, to know that a great scholar of natural history had made a full and satisfying life in my town. I did not know until long after I left the place that it afforded the possibility of an intellectual life. And then he ends with something really that kind of hit me hard, which says, nothing in my education prepared me to believe or encouraged me to expect that there was any reason to be interested in my own place. It's really amazing. And as I think about my growing up in northern part of Iran, I think, yeah, there was nothing in my education that told me anything about where I grew up. Only after I came here, I started saying, whoa, what was the rainfall in my town? What were birds in my place? And stuff like that. So I think about that a lot. What is the responsibility of education and higher education and our communities to nurture the love of place so that we can begin to address things that are happening to us and things so that we begin developing agency in very places that we live. So I think that if, it says nothing in my education prepared me to believe, encouraged me to expect that there was any reason to be interested in my own place. We need to correct that, right? And over the last few years, I would say maybe last 10 years, I've started my class every semester, just the very first thing that we do in my class. I just give them a slip of paper, everybody sits silently, just solo, answers 2 questions, which is whether it is important for citizens of a region to know what's going on in the region, whether this is an important thing, just that. And whether that is fundamental to democracy. And the responses have been astonishing. And of course, at UNI, about 97% or so of our student populations are from Iowa, right? We're very different from ISU and University of Iowa. Most students are from Iowa, and they want to be here. And I would say I get 99.9% of the students say, yes, it's absolutely important to know where we live, and it's absolutely important to democracy. And that makes me very happy. And so it makes me think that in higher education, we need to create experiences, create situations where our students learn about the region where they live. We need to show them that we're competent and that we want to be citizens of this region. And in order to do that, we need to kind of, like everything else, we need to kind of have practice that. We need to practice learning about our region so that we feel, okay, we can do even small things, so that we can develop our confidence to take on bigger and bigger things. So the kind of the last things I was going to mention is this idea of conservation as citizenship. Given all of that's going on in Kentucky, all of that's going on here, conservation requires action. You know, the idea of conservation of the region that we're in requires action. It requires hope. So I feel like we need to live by example, that we need to show ourselves and our students and our community that we do not take this region for granted. That we do not take its soil and water and biodiversity for granted. That we love this region. This is our home. We love it, and we do all that we can to defend it against the short-sighted minds that are bent on degrading our region for short-term profit, which is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing. People are drinking fertilizer. It couldn't be any worse than that. It's a sign that our region is being exploited by others. And somehow the decision makers of our state aren't bothered by that. It's really amazing. And the only people who are going to change that is us, right? Nobody's going to change it for us. Nobody. And nothing is more important than this upcoming election. We got to find, it's not about party line, it's about people who care about this region and want to protect it and want to make it better. And only, Washington isn't preventing us from to protect our region, right? Nobody said, don't do this. Washington isn't saying, don't buy food from farmers near you. Right? Washington isn't saying you should go and spray the lawn in your school district. It's totally our own doing. We don't have to spray our lawns, but we're doing it. There's a ton. We could make a long list of things that nobody's preventing us from doing it, but we're not doing it. We just got to get together. We got to organize, and we got to do it. Right? So conservation in my mind, is a true form of citizenship. The idea that we practice, the idea that democracy isn't just an idea, but it's a place. That we practice democracy in a specific place, like this campus, this town, this county, we say it, actually, if you think about it, we even say it in our national ideals. Land of the free, emphasis on land of the free, home of the brave, It's not about Democrats, Republicans, it's about land of the free, home of the brave. So, it's about a place, and the place that we share is not in good shape right now. Our waters are polluted, our soils are running away, and we know we have solutions. So let me give you an example. A ton. That's what I do. I see examples all over Iowa of conservation. People doing amazing things. So this summer, I had a chance to go visit my friends in western Iowa. Ron and Maria Roseman, who farm near Harlan, Iowa. They've been doing this work for past 35 years. They've shown that you can farm, have a very productive, high-yielding farm without buying any pesticides, without buying any synthetic fertilizer, improving their soil quality, biodiversity of their farm. We saw bobolinks nesting on their farm. We saw dickcissel nesting on their farm. So that's care of the land as citizenship. They've been citizens of that place. I think the process of land conservation helps us connect with each other. And that's what's kind of missing. Again, with everybody says we're such a divided nation. Well, I think if we get busy trying to solve things that we share in common, that's what's going to bring us together. It's not the party line. This brings us together, allowing each of us to become citizens of a specific place. Country above party, right? So in my town, so that I've gotten in that process of conservation, even though it may be about a tiny plot of land, I've gotten to know the recent immigrants from Burma through gardening, so that they feel at home. The process of conservation and interacting with and improving land heals us too, and the people who have experienced discontinuity in their lives, like people of Burma and like a lot of other refugees, that they actually are developing new roots in Waterloo, that they feel connected to a place, and they've gotten to know people like me, that I've been lucky to meet them. So I end with kind of a few ideas, and then we can have discussions. In her introduction to A Guide to Locally Focused Teaching, naturalist Anne Zwinger writes, "Getting to know home is the most human and necessary of occupations. To give the power of observation to students is to give them something of infinite value and importance, something to do for the rest of their lives." Right? Getting to know home. We keep kind of forgetting, but that's really it's the most important thing. This is what some have called place-based education, education that is connected to a place, education that will turn out citizens with deep appreciation of their region and a good sense of how to care for it. Citizens who understand the impact of their habits on other people, like our wasteful electricity use leading to miserable lives in Kentucky, and other lands near and far. This is what Wes Jackson calls a homecoming education. And Wes Jackson happened to be my father-in-law, and he had written this beautiful book where he describes this, the real homecoming, where we really start paying attention to where we are and what all of this means. So I guess what I want to end with is that there is just so much to do here. We've got so much work to do. There's so much to pay attention to, so many mistakes to correct, so many gifts from people before us to appreciate, so many landscapes and streams to restore, so many trees to plant, so many neighborhoods to revitalize. There is just so many ways to show our children and the world that we live in a very special place and we love it. Thanks for listening. So I kind of floated some ideas about home place, homecoming, about what was going on in Kentucky, posed a few questions. I really want us to have a discussion about how these ideas resonate with you, what questions do you have, and things like that. I want to know what you think, and we can have a conversation.
And I've got
There's a question in the back.
Around if you have questions. And Kamyar, you're making me feel really good, because any biology student of mine that's been with me for 2 years has definitely been in a prairie, and more than once.
That's wonderful.
All right, Alex in the back.
So what are your thoughts on GMOs? We recently talked about that in one of our biology classes, and I do believe that if we used genetically modified organisms to reduce the number of pesticides and the amount of synthetic, sorry, I forgot the word, chemicals on our plants, do you believe GMOs would be worth it?
Okay, that's a really great question. So I'll come back. So some of the pictures I was going to bring and share with you that I decided not be distracted by pictures were stories of, so I mentioned stories of Ron Roseman, and I happen to know a lot of other farmers over the last 25 years we've lived here. And so these are the farms that have high-yielding crops. They're not using genetically modified organisms, genetically altered corn and soybean crops, and they're practicing long-term crop rotation. They're doing a lot of kind of basic agronomy that all farmers used prior to World War II. So I don't know, it's a long, the story of genetically modified crops is a long story, and the kind of the short version is that there was a promise that was given that it was going to be high yielding, it was going to reduce pesticide use, it was going to save money, and none of that worked. None of that worked. Now we have strong evidence, and it has led to what everybody now knows. It's a weed killer treadmill, where we've basically the weed killers that went with those genetically modified crops, which is Roundup now, that weed killer no longer works. And weed scientists knew that at the very beginning, but nobody paid attention to them. So now we have all kinds of weeds that are resistant to Roundup, and nothing kills them, so we're using more and more and more and more weed killers. So it's a totally dead end. It was never intended to be anything else. It's just, and it cost farmers a bunch of money. And the health, we just had a one-day gathering, not just, it was in May, had a one-day gathering near Iowa City with all these public health people, and we heard a big presentation about kind of birth outcomes. What's going to happen with all these pesticides used in Iowa? What's going to happen? What is it doing? Where does it go? We're talking about 50 million pounds per year in Iowa, applied to Iowa soils. Where does this stuff go? These are highly hazardous chemicals, linked to breast cancer, in Europe, they're banned. Some of these stuff are banned. Atrazine is banned. And so it just goes on and on and on, I'm glad you asked that, because we're just launching a whole kind of an educational campaign to raise awareness of pesticides in Iowa. Nobody's really talking about it. If you followed like the lawsuit that you heard from City of Des Moines, that's just about fertilizer. Everybody talks about nutrient reduction, right? Nutrient reduction. Well, yeah, nutrient reduction is nutrient problems are a manifestation of a bad cropping system, which is corn and beans that has been incentivized. And one of the other problems that nobody talks about is, we get fertilizer loss, but we get a lot of, that system requires a lot of pesticides, which is not good. So genetically modified organisms, they were never intended to solve a problem, because there was no problem. The problem was managing weeds. We already knew how to manage weeds through cultivation, through crop rotation. What's the big deal? But no, we had to do genetic modification, because then farmers became dependent on only the seeds that they sold. They couldn't save seeds. So there's many, many problems. So here's a question here. Sorry for a long answer to your question, but it's a very good question. It's a complicated question.
You mentioned that the food we eat doesn't come from Iowa. Do you happen to know where it comes from?
Okay, so a great question. So basically, if you go to a grocery store and kind of inventory items that are in the store, I would say, obviously, corn sweetener probably can be traced back to Iowa. But, seasonally, stores have, sweet corn and pumpkins, and I would say we've gotten better. There's occasionally, some locally produced items, and so that's one kind of initiative that I was involved in heavily, both in our region around Blackhawk County, but across Iowa, is to connect farmers to large food buyers, grocers, restaurants. So to answer your question, most of our vegetables are coming from California and from abroad. A lot of other things are very hard to track because the food industry has made it very difficult. And one of those things that's hard to track is meat. It's very hard to determine where the meat that you buy at the store comes from. A lot of it is imported from abroad. We're processed abroad. It's very complicated. And so a lot of us who are trying to strengthen our local food economy have made a case that we need to get to know kind of who is producing, make that chain from Iowa soil to our plate very transparent and very clear. And we came up with a kind of a slogan, which is, you know your doctor, you know your dentist. Do you know your farmer, right? Everybody knows their doctor and dentist, but where do we know our farmer? Well, I know where our family buys our pork and ground beef. We know who we buy all of our produce from on our garden and everything. Yes, there are times that we go, in winter months, we go to Hy-Vee and get produce there. But again, I guess the point of that is, as I've learned about Iowa's food culture, there was a lot more food grown in Iowa. We had grapes. We were like number 2 in table grape production, major apple state. We had just so much crop diversity, wheat, oats, all kinds of stuff, and we've kind of reduced that diversity. So the local food movement in Iowa, a lot of us are trying to get schools serve better meals, buy from local farms, colleges, grocery stores, restaurants. People are actually, there are right now several Iowa food distributing companies that have formed. So we're building a whole local food supply chains that are really incredible. All of it, people are doing it, right? People have gotten together are doing it. And some of the organizations, Practical Farmers of Iowa, there's the Iowa Food Hub. There's quite a few of them around Iowa City, around Des Moines. So it's really great question. So yeah, I mean, we live in Iowa. It's a beautiful place, beautiful land, and quite a few farmers that could grow a diversity of crop, but we seem like we got the idea is that we need to organize ourselves to invest in that, and it's going to take a while. You can kind of calculate that. You can get some easy estimates of that. In Blackhawk County, the residents of our county, and there are about 50,000 households in Blackhawk County. We spend roughly $600 million every year buying food. Most of that leaves our community. And so we've made a case that if we made a goal of committing to 10% local, which we think is very doable, 10% local, that would mean $60 million that will be invested in food and farm businesses of our region. So that's real economic development, So, great question.
Terry, you got a question?
What's the name of that book about Kentucky?
Called Lost Mountain. Lost Mountain, yeah. It's the actually name of that particular ridge. Yes.
So you actually, about that mountain, so you were saying that the mountain just kind of disappears with all the coal mining and stuff. Like in Alaska, I know up north we have a like conservation thing where they like replant the section and they put a lot of the dirt back and everything afterwards. Is there a reason that they're not doing that in like Kentucky and those other places?
I'm not that familiar with, there's a whole idea of reclamation, right? Once you kind of clean up the site, and I think that's going on. They do some of that, but it's that during the mining process, the bulk of the mountain is pushed over and it just covers up everything in the valley and it causes trouble. So that's what that was. Yeah, but yeah, they probably do plant, but you can't replace a native ecosystem, right? You can't really replace old growth forests, and that's what happens there once. Yeah, there's a question there.
Carmel, you got a question?
I heard that farmers don't get paid a lot. Do you think that's why we don't farm here?
Okay, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Closer.
I heard farmers don't get paid a lot. Is that why we don't farm here and have our own food?
Okay, I heard the first part. You've heard that farmers
Actually,
aren't...
heard that farmers don't get paid a lot. Is that maybe why, we're not producing our own food here in Iowa?
Oh, I see. You've heard that farmers aren't paid a lot, and that's why we're not producing our food? It's a great question, but it's more complicated than that. But yes, well, the two crops that are grown, one of them is subsidized, and it turns out that the cost of production, most years, the cost of producing corn is more than what selling it brings. You following me, right? So in other words, it's a losing operation unless it's subsidized. So that's one problem. But generally, yes, the economy of Iowa, based on those two crops, has not inspired many people to go in that enterprise. That's why we have a depopulation, and that's why a lot of small towns that were very dependent on agricultural well-being of agriculture have diminished. Another reason is, so again, you think of, okay, I've been thinking about doing kind of a little analysis of that. Would be interesting to calculate millions or billions of dollars that are invested in Iowa in the form of corn subsidy, or any form of subsidy that's invested in Iowa, and then comparing that to, which is obviously to subsidize corn, then compare that with subsidizing anything else, like a different food system, like subsidizing carrots and potatoes and tomatoes, and subsidizing a freezing facility, a vegetable processing facility, a distribution facility, a cold storage facility. Who's going to do that, right? Who's going to fund that to rebuild a system that would allow us to grow our food here? Not all of it, but what grows here? I mean, nobody's suggesting we shouldn't eat from any other region. It's just that a lot of it we could grow here, right? Why shouldn't we? I mean, the answer to your question is just, yeah, there is unfairness in our current market, and when vegetables that are grown in California with very cheap labor, when they aren't fully compensated, and we can bring in all that cheap stuff, then somebody who's growing vegetables here is competing with that. So there are all kinds of things like that's way beyond what I know. Yes.
There you go.
So where you're from, do you see similar problems with flash floods and the fertilizer and buying food locally and stuff like that?
You're talking about like in Cedar Falls?
Didn't you? Where did you say you were from?
Okay, I mean that was 40 years ago.
Do you know any of the history over there, like how?
No, I don't. But I'll tell you a lot more about Iowa. So, and I wish I had brought the slides. So here's the thing, and this is really an important, very important thing, that the problems of Iowa that I described are entirely unnecessary. In other words, I mean, it's very important to know that solutions are entirely at hand. We don't even need to do extra research to solve 90% of all of the problems Iowa is experiencing right now, which is fertilizer pollution, pesticide pollution, hog lot issues, right? These things we already know. We have long-term kind of, I'm kind of coming back to your answer of, well, is there flash flooding? I know you asked about northern Iran, but I don't know about that, okay? But I know their agriculture has unfortunately simplified to, instead of diversity of crops, there's just a few crops. In a region I grew up, there was only rice. There was rice, there was tea, there was orchards, there was citrus, there was all kinds of stuff. I really don't know what it is now. But in Iowa, Iowa State University agronomists have done long-term studies, like 15 years of data, growing corn bean. Next to it, corn bean, small grain, oats, and then a 4-year rotation. So the 2-year rotation, 3-year rotation, 4-year rotation. They compared this over many years under the same climate, right? They kept, all of them experienced the same thing. Guess what? The 3-year crop rotation had higher yield than corn and bean. It used 88% less pesticides. It used 80% less synthetic fertilizer. Amazing. It's like shocking results, but results that farmers prior to World War II, where everybody was farming organically, they already knew that. Crop rotations. You don't need to buy fertilizer. You don't need to buy pesticides. We already knew this stuff. But over the last 20 years, agronomy department at ISU documented it just beautifully. And better soil quality, better infiltration. That means when there's a 5-inch rain, the soil can handle it. Right now, Iowa is so flashy, just like it rains 3 inches, all the places are flooded. So there is and then, of course, the other amazing discovery that really ISU, again, in the agronomy department and ag engineering department, they've documented is this. That if you plant 10% of a watershed into native plants, it produces disproportionately high ecological benefits. So one of those ecological benefits is because prairies have very deep roots and water is stored in the soil profile. So they've seen massive reduction in runoff wherever they've had prairie. So we could totally improve the state's water quality, fertilizer problem, pesticide problem by simply incentivizing crop rotation, incentivizing prairie planting, incentivizing these things. And, it's like farmers would do it. It's like, but those incentives aren't there right now. Everything's just say corn, just plant corn, and we have all kinds of incentives. But for conservation, yes, there is some little money here and there, but not in a serious way. So kind of long answer to your question. But those are, I had a lot of beautiful images of prairies on farms where farmers have planted prairies, and there's several programs going on. But the crop rotation part, which is more fundamental in the long term, that is not really incentivized. And that's what we need to work on. We got to ask our Congress, we got to ask our state, saying, when are we going to do this, So, sorry. I don't know who else had a question.
So some things that I think about are an age of mass consumption, food consumption particularly, shelf life of the food that we're eating, and the amount of waste that we have here in the United States, from your large kitchens to your home kitchen, when we're throwing away our fruits and vegetables because they've spoiled, or otherwise we just don't eat everything on our plate. So how does that impact this whole cycle?
I'm trying to kind of find the part of question. I'm trying to understand. So, can you repeat?
Mass consumption.
Okay. Yeah.
Mass consumption, and then shelf life of the food that we're eating, and then the amount of waste because of the short shelf life of some of the fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
That impacts this whole process, this whole cycle of, well, instead of buying it local, we buy it elsewhere because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
But now that has food miles added to it.
Yeah.
It's coming from wherever.
So there is food miles, really, and then of course the kind of the need to revitalize cooking, right? Cooking, gardening takes time, and so it's all mixed in there. But appreciating food that comes from our region requires cooking. It requires cooking unless, again, we have right now, because we haven't set up all the other infrastructure, so there is right now one freezing facility near Marshalltown where they're buying vegetables like corn and beans, like sweet corn and green beans and strawberries and blueberries from Iowa farms and freezing them. And you can actually find them at Hy-Vee. You got to find out. It's called can't remember the name, but yeah, I mean, there is. I think eating from our region will transform some aspect of our food system, and invest in local farms. I mean, that's the thing. It'll be a little more expensive. It can't be cheap. That's the thing. People think food has to be really, really cheap, but somebody has to be paid. Other questions, other ideas about how do we revitalize? Here's my question to you is, maybe after your question, I want to know what are your thoughts on how do we reclaim our agency in our state? How do we strengthen the democracy in our state? How do we improve? How do we organize ourselves to take on these challenges? So anyway, you had a question.
Actually, Joe had a question, but I got to
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So we talk a lot about water quality in my classes,
Yes.
current events and things.
Yes.
And I think Iowans and a lot of Midwesterners have kind of the old story of the frog and the boiling water kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Where, if I take my students down to the river and say, hey guys, you want a glass of water out of this river? Everyone's like, no, I'm not drinking river water. Well, what if we took a time machine and we took one of our pioneer ancestors from the 1800s and brought him here? And he said, what, you can't drink the water out of the river? You're joking, right? And yet we've come to expect that as normal.
Yeah.
And so, what do you say to the farmer that says, well, okay, my dad did it this way, my grandpa did it this way. On the news, I hear there's a water quality problem. Farm Bureau says that, no, there's no problem with what you're doing. It's all the weather's fault. The guys at Iowa State are saying, actually we do have a problem. And so, Joe, in here.
You talked about how the farmers are polluting the water. How do we prevent the chemicals from reaching our creeks and streams, or is there a way we can't?
So the main, I mentioned there were two major strategies, again, based on sound agronomy, okay, based on long-term studies. The two ways is not how do we prevent, the question really isn't how do we prevent chemicals from reaching the streams. The question is how do we implement a cropping system that doesn't need pesticides? How do we implement a cropping system that's not leaky? So the current cropping system, which is corn, bean, or in many cases, just corn, right? It's inherently leaky. So think about that. There is nothing that the most conscientious farmer can do to make that system not leak. It's just leaky. It's just the nature of a corn bean system. It leaks. On the other hand, the 3- and 4-year crop rotations are not as leaky. They're significantly less leaky. Okay, so that's one. And it also turns out that the 3-4-year crop rotations don't need as much pesticides. They don't need as much fertilizer. They use legumes. They use probably integrating crop and livestock. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on there. So, and again, organic farmers, that's another thing. There are numerous organic farmers in Iowa growing corn, beans, animals. I think it would be very Ron and Maria Roseman have been doing it for 35 years. I know Tom Franzen in Chickasaw County. In every county, there are organic farmers. You got to go visit their farms and see how they're doing it. I mean, it's amazing. It's a cultural exchange, right? We got to learn. These are the people who have the cultural knowledge of how to farm in a place without leaking a lot of stuff. We got to learn from them. We got to popularize that. They've taken the time to do that, right? There's a lot of knowledge. Organic farming, 3-year crop rotation, all these diverse cropping systems are knowledge intensive. They're not easy stuff, and they're complicated to manage. These systems are complicated, and these people have been doing it for a long time. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question. So if you have other questions, maybe you can. Jump up afterwards,
okay,
but I think, Janet, you had your hand up, right?
Yeah.
You want to go?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
And if you got other questions, you can come up and talk to them afterwards.
Okay.
So in a slightly different direction, so you're talking about teaching and about specifically teaching in your classes about local things.
Yes.
Now it sounds like compared to you, we have a lot more students from other areas and not just from Iowa.
Yeah.
So how does that relating, teaching about your home and where you live relate when you have a more diverse student population?
I love it. That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Okay, so I think regardless, we got to have exercises that immerse our students in a place. Even though, nobody said everybody should live in Mahaska County forever, right? So let's say you have students who are here from India, let's say, or from New York, or they would learn how to be deeply engaged in something and learn about this place. It's like this is a microcosm of the universe, right? It's just one place. And I always said, if you learn why we have soil erosion in Iowa, you will know why China has soil erosion. You gotta dig in one place and really learn what's going on. And then that's a good exercise to find out, okay, if you're in Nigeria, you kind of have some sense of of course, it may not be exactly the same, but you'll have a deepened kind of experience of one place, and then there's land, there's things about land that are common. So I don't know if that helps, but in my experience, I don't know any other way. We got to go to a place, and that place is, soil, water, air, biodiversity, and wherever you go, those things are going to be, and people, right? And we're all there, and so we got to kind of grapple with complexity of that, and only by kind of engaging with it, you'll realize, oh, I see. For example, I didn't know that 1 out of 2 children in Blackhawk County are in families that are, not doing well financially. And by looking at one place, I've learned so much about what's happening in my community. It's just an exercise. So for people who are from here, hopefully they really think, wow, I'm gonna dig in. I'm gonna be in Iowa anyway, so I'm gonna really have the tools to transform things. And for others who aren't from here, saying, well, when I go back to New York or wherever, I'm gonna really pay attention. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. So I'm so honored that you've taken the time to be here, and I'll stick around. We can talk some more. Thank you so much for coming.